This is the first class in a series given by Brother Christian Russell on the subject, The Journey of the Man of God. This class is titled, Becoming, Part 1.
In one of his last interviews in 2016, Stephen Hawking made an interesting admission. He was asked what one thing he was still unsure about, to which he gave the following answer. Why do the universe and all the laws of nature exist? Are they necessary? In one sense, he says they are, because otherwise we wouldn't be here to ask the question, but is there a deeper reason? That was what he was still unsure about. After all of that theory, after a lifetime of advanced thinking, after scientific discovery, he was still at a loss to explain why. All that chasing understanding, but at a loss to explain the meaning. It's as if in a strange way, it's a bit like a treadmill. The more knowledge we acquire, the more knowledge we chase, the further from understanding we get. But it doesn't matter how many degrees or qualifications you have or how much information you have at your fingertips. In order to find true meaning, we have to let go of worldly thinking and acknowledge that God's ways are higher than our ways. Now, I've had a lot of fun in reading the last few years the works of Jewish philosopher Abraham Heschel, A.J. Heschel. And he wrote this. He wrote, as civilization advances, our sense of wonder, or we could use the word awe, if I have to translate that. If you said awe, you probably think I'm mining something. American, say it for me. Jennifer, say it. There you go. Our sense of awe declines. Doesn't sound the same, does it? What we lack, he said, is not a desire to believe, but a desire to wonder. So even atheists believe in atheism. They believe that when they flick the switch, the lights will come on. But what is removed by science is wonder. There's an answer to everything, they say, and there's a mystery in nothing, they say. And yet, what they've lost, they don't realize that what they've lost is fundamental. Abraham Heschel goes on to say, life without wonder is not worth living. Because it's not about academics, is it? It's not about academics. It's not about being academically naive, even. I don't understand how the plane takes off. Well, I do a little bit. And I don't understand how my laptop works. Well, I do a little bit. But I'm amazed that it works. But I know somebody planned it and designed it. And I attribute that success to them. It's about denying God his majesty when we take that away from God. In order to reduce everything down to something that I can explain. Okay, but what you've just done is you've diminished the role of God. You've diminished his majesty, his greatness. And I, for one, am happy to live in awe of his presence, in awe of his handiwork. In Exodus 15, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders? Who is like you, O God? Psalm 66, come and see the works of God. He is awesome in his doing towards the sons of men. So not only is God awesome, but he's awesome in his doings towards the sons of men. And I think that's the key. I think that's the key, because what I really need, especially when I'm in difficult times, when I'm feeling low, is to believe that God can save me. He can rescue me. He can deliver me even by miraculous means. And if I've removed his ability to be able to do that, where's my hope? I want to believe that he can save me, rescue me, and deliver me, even in ways I could never comprehend, and also accept it if the answer to my prayer is no. Because I understand his plan and his purpose, and I have submitted to him, to it. So people want to find meaning and see how it all connects. And that's why I think the reason the journey appeals to people today, because they can see how things connect. This is my life journey. This is your life journey. We have these things in common. We walk this path. There's similar things and stories that are connected to people at a more fundamental level. And they feel that sense of belonging. They feel that sense of belonging when you can see these connections. But that's not how I came to this subject. You see, this is a very personal subject for me because 26 years ago now, I moved from the countryside in England and moved to Los Angeles. And perhaps you can imagine how seamless a transition that was going from rural England to LA. But there was a fork in the road, and I went this way. And I've actually now lived here more time than I ever did in the UK. And I know that I share that experience with several of you. You've had this very real experience in your life. And so the journey, the idea of the journey, the thought, the subject of the journey has always had some very real application for me. It's impacted my marriage, it's impacted my kids, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later. But it's had a very real application for me, and it's not always been easy. It's been helpful for me to personally to have this subject to create a roadmap for myself, some sort of roadmap that helps me get past that fork. So there's these theories about life's journey. Most people adhere to this one. Most people think of our life as a straight line. They think of our life journey as a straight line from beginning to end, from birth to death, with milestones and stages in between. And I have to also add, I spend a lot of my time in my job, in my work, looking at the demographics of large employers, thousands of employees, and looking at their disability benefits and their leave utilization, state and federal leaves, and which different demographic falls into which, what kind of leave they file and for how long. And a lot of it, we're looking at analyzing most people's lives as a sort of a straight line, a two-dimensional straight line. And I want you to forget that. I know I put nice little pictures in there, but I do want you to forget that it's a straight line. Some people say it's a squiggly line, like a switchback. Some people say it's a maze. Some people think of life like steps, and some people say things life is like a spiral. And some even admit a third dimension, or a fourth dimension even, because this one man said, Robert McCracken said, God is living in the circle of eternity, and we are the straight line cut from the world and must be hammered, bent, and broken, and to be reforged into his circle. And I like this idea of life as being like a spiral because it's sort of fourth dimensional, and also because it places God at the center. It places God at the center instead of a straight line that could be measured and counted and analyzed. God is at the center, and my journey is a spiritual journey, is unquantifiable. It can't be measured. Somebody can't tell me the analytics of it. They can't analyze it because it's mine. And on my journey, I find meaning. And on my journey, I grow and become a child of God. So that's the idea of the journey, just sort of in a sort of a theory, is it's a spiral with God at the middle, and I'm on this journey. This is my spiritual journey. Now, the class I titled this first class "Becoming," because this is what we are. I feel that the first stage of this is about becoming a child of God. And there are two words for become in Hebrew. Both mean to exist. Both mean that they are in a state that you find them. But one means to occur, like a single event. And the other one means to come to pass, to be accomplished. In other words, over time. One describes what is, and the other describes the result of a process or process. So one describes what is, the other describes the result of a process. A couple of examples of the process are here. Genesis 18, since Abraham shall surely become a great nation and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Surely, this didn't happen like that in an instant. It took time. It became, and is still in the process of becoming. Is still in the process of being fulfilled. Genesis 2, and he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And I think we're very much mistaken. The error we make about marriage, we're very much mistaken if we believe that our relationship as a husband and wife happens in a moment. I see you all nodding. The moment you exchange rings, yes, your relationship changes. That's an event. I've been married for 26 years, and I can tell you that it takes time to become one flesh. Jennifer and I are companions, and we've gone through the thick of it. And our companionship, our friendship, our relationship has developed and strengthened through that journey. But we've been in a process of becoming one flesh, a process of becoming husband and wife. So again, a process. Birth is quick, but growing up takes time. A wedding is quick, but how long does it take to turn that marriage license into a marriage? So a key, I'm going to try to develop some keys for you, just simple keys. But key, it takes time and it takes work. And that's true of any relationship. It's true of any journey. It's true of anything. So it takes time and it takes work. In the Greek, the word become means to cause to be, literally to generate, to come into being. And so it's that same idea, that it's not just a moment or a singular event, but it's a process. A New Testament example, Matthew 18, then Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and said, assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. That doesn't just mean you're converted, you get baptized, and all of a sudden you're a little child. We know that it's a process to become. Being born into Christ, to become related to God, is different from becoming a child of God. Becoming a brother and a sister in Christ. And I think that this is, if we try to remember this, this is helpful because we overachievers, those amongst you who are like me, who overachieve and feel bad about themselves when they trip or they fall or they make a mistake, they beat themselves up, will maybe give ourselves a little grace. And for those of you who aren't overachievers and don't suffer from that problem, maybe you'll give a little grace to those people who are tripping up and failing because it's a process to become a child of God. If we try to remember this, I think it will be helpful. So like all relationships, our journey takes work, and they require grace. An example there from John 1, but as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God. To those who believe in his name, who were born not out of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So this is an important foundational point about our spiritual journey. Before we really start walking along this journey, is to understand these foundational points. And this foundational point about our spiritual journey is important because I think probably one of the biggest frustrations we often face on our journey is the lack of progress. When we get stuck. We get stuck, and if you do, remember, it's a process. It takes time. It takes work. Now, a second foundational point is this, and it's also sort of helpful for us to understand. The journeys that we take say a lot about who we are, the kind of people we are. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. Let's say we know one person, and I know one person who does this. They take an annual vacation every year, and they travel from wherever they are to Las Vegas. Every year. They've got money in their pocket. They never come back with any, but they've got money in their pocket, and this is their trip. They go from here to Las Vegas, and they do that every year. What does that tell you about that person? These are the journeys that this person chooses to take. That's what they choose to do. That's one. Let's say you know a second person, and I met a gentleman. This is the reason why this example is because I met a gentleman in a vitamin shop, and he was praying. He was at work there, and he was in the back room. There was nobody else in, and I walk in, and I see him praying. And so we got talking. And he was telling me that he was preparing for a pilgrimage. And it struck me that this is the example of a second person who takes a vacation every year too, and travels at great personal cost, at sacrifice. He goes there and back again for a purpose. What does that tell you about that person? The journey that he takes or she takes. What does that tell you about that person? Our third person, this is the risk that some of us face. The third person never takes a vacation. He spends all of his time in the office. And when he's on vacation, he's on his email. There's people like that, and I sometimes have to prevent myself from raising my hand. There's many of you who do that. Not just brethren, also sisters do this too now. They spend all of their time at the office. Your daily journey is from home to work and back again every day. what does that daily journey, or what does that journey of that person tell you about that person? See what I mean? The journeys that we take say a lot about who we are. They are evidential. They are evidential because they give us evidence of that person's motivations, what drives them, what they believe, what they feel, what they want. In fact, we may be known ourselves by the journeys that we take. We may be known for or because of the journeys that we take. The path that people see us travel, our neighbors, our colleagues, what do they witness? I purposefully now tell people at work when I'm traveling somewhere why I'm going. I'm going to another Bible conference. I want them that to be a witness to them in a way. And those are the sorts of things that, because people will see the journeys that we take as evidence of the kind of character or the driving force in our lives. And we see this same principle echoed in scriptures too. The passage that I asked Brother Harold to read was Psalm 139. And the psalmist says in verse 1-3, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off." And verse 3, "Thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways." That's the King James. So in another version, that will translate here as, "You comprehend my path." This is the New King James. "You comprehend my path, my lying down. You are acquainted with all of my ways." And it's a verse with two parts. I think it's called a parallelism. Two parts of that verse both say the same thing but differently. The first part of it, God comprehends our path. It means to diffuse, to scatter, to sow, but it also means to winnow and to sift, to separate the good from the bad. God is doing that. God comprehends our path. He's winnowing our path. He's sifting the good from the bad. God sees our path, good and bad, our whole journey. He sees our whole journey. And the second part of that verse 3 in Psalm 139, says it in a different way. "You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways." If you consider it in a couple of different versions, the NIV is there for you. The NET version, "You discern my going out, my lying down. You are familiar with all my ways. You carefully observe me when I travel, when I lie down to rest. You are aware of everything I do." Our whole journey, not parts of it, our whole journey, our whole path is understood by God. Good and bad. All of the steps, from start to finish. Job understands this, interestingly, in his arguing, and when he's arguing before God, he says in Job 31, verse 4, "Does he not see my ways and count all my steps?" So Job emphasizes this point about the journey. First of all, for the believer, for the man of God, the woman of God, the journey before God, God comprehends your journey. Not just parts of it, but the whole thing. Job understood. And I think that might help explain why once Job hit rock bottom, that he bounced back quickly, because he knew that God saw everything. God knew and was counting each of his steps. So my question then is, can it hurt for us to try to comprehend our own journey? To try to look at it in some way, rather than just walking down the street and getting punched and getting tripping up and falling over and going, "Oh, I don't know where that came from," and "Oh, I feel so low now. Why is that happening to me?" Why we go through life and we go on our spiritual journey or our literal journey, our life journey, why can't we try to give some thought to comprehending it, to understanding it, to find meaning, instead of life just happening to us? Now, there are many, so another key, God comprehends your path. Now, there are many journeys of faithful men and women we can look at, but I'd like to look at the journeys recorded for us of Elijah and Elisha, and it's their journey which will provide a framework for these classes. Elijah and Elisha were prophets. They spanned, we don't know exactly where they traded off, but about 60 or 70 years. And I think it's interesting, just starting right there, that if their shared journey was about 60 to 70 years, what's our typical lifespan? About 60 to 70, 80 years, right? Similar. So I found that was interesting, that it was the same amount of time as our journeys last. Now, if what we do is we list the places that Elijah went, and Elisha after him, in the order in which they occur, we can also map them. Now, not every single place that they visit was recorded for us, is detailed for us. It's interesting, and I find it instructive, the places that are. That's the point. Why the places that were recorded for us. But what you find is that they both have a similar number of destinations recorded in this scripture. And what we also find is there are common experiences they share on their journeys. And the reason why it came up was I was thinking, no, was it Elijah or Elisha who healed the widow's son? Or the miracles that they performed and the things that happened? I was getting confused. Is it Elijah? Is it Elisha? It's both. There's some similarities between them and in a similar order. So if we list the 12 places here for Elijah and then we list the places for Elisha, we can create these maps. And if I said notice anything, you may not until I do an overlay of them, and you'll see a difference. We're talking about similarities, but I want to point out the difference here. We see that Elijah's journey that's recorded for us is mostly along the boundaries of the land, also outside the land of Israel, Zarephath, Carmel, Beersheba, Mount Horeb. By contrast, Elisha's journey is different. Elisha's journey is noticeably within the borders. Bethel, Samaria, Dothan, Shunem, over and over. That's the journey of Elisha. So before we look at the similarities, I want to look at this thing that's substantively different. Elisha was from the Jordan Valley. We know that. Elisha was from the Jordan Valley. His message was to the people, clearly. That's evidential from his journey. I think that's clear. But Elijah's journey is interesting. It has me scratching my head. What about Elijah? Elijah's journey around the perimeter of the land is curious and I think could suggest something about the life of Elijah or the origin of Elijah or who Elijah was. I don't have time to go into too much detail, so I'm just going to do one of those things where I throw the hand grenade in there and I run. But I'm going to propose the possibility that Elijah could have been a Gentile. I have 3 fairly compelling reasons for suggesting that potentially outrageous suggestion. I feel that this is a safe place for me to be able to propose that suggestion. And here they are. First, Elijah has no family name recorded anywhere in Scripture. And the other people that we know, who we know were Gentiles, who also have no family name recorded, were Melchizedek and Job. And they were, even though the Jews tried to say that Melchizedek was Shem, because they're trying to tie that critical person into their Jewish lineage, Job and Melchizedek don't have any family name either. I think that's telling. The second reason is the one place that historians and archaeologists have never found is Tishbe. Tishbe, the third reason, is now thought to be a transliteration, or one of them, and it should be translated. In other words, the phrase, Elijah the Tishbite of the inhabitants of Gilead, could be translated as Elijah, a captive of the sojourners and travelers or foreigners in Gilead. So 3 reasons why possibly Elijah was a Gentile. At the end of the day, don't take me outside and grill me, please. I'm not being dogmatic about it. Take it or leave it. I'm just speculating about it. But if he was a Gentile, it could have some interesting consequences, couldn't it? The 2 olive trees in Zechariah 4, one being a Gentile, one being a Jew. The 2 witnesses in Revelation 11, one being a Gentile, one being a Jew. Or the transfiguration in Matthew 17, where Jesus is sustained by people of faith, one being a Gentile, one being a Jew. That would fit, wouldn't it? It would be a nice image, a nice picture. Again, it's just speculating. I throw it out there for your digestive juices. Elijah's name means the Lord is God. If he was a foreigner, or a sojourner, or a traveler, would it surprise you that his journey would take him outside of the country, outside of the nation, around the borders of the land, and that his message to the people, to the whole nation and its neighbors, was to teach the nation about their God? The Lord is your God. What about Elisha? Elisha's name means the Lord is salvation. That's a very personal message. That's different. Surely his message was for the salvation of the people. So Elijah's journey could have been for the saving of the nation. Elisha's journey for the saving of the people. That's just what I'm going to propose. Now, next, if we match the events up to where they were, the events of Elijah and Elisha, if we match them up to the places they occurred, so the events match now with the places on the left and the events on the right, we can do that for both Elijah and Elisha. And what we do is if we see them side by side, we see that they start to line up. Both performed miracles with water and oil. Both raised a widow's son from the dead. Both suffered opposition and were pursued, faced challenges. Both saw the Lord and his power. Both anointed others to serve. Both were victorious over sin and idolatry. Both defeated idolatrous kings and queens. And both destroyed the prophets of Baal. And so a similar pattern emerges between them. And I've identified these stages as a pattern. And some of you may have seen this before. I apologize if you have seen it before. But it's worth repeating. The common stages of the journey of Elijah and Elisha fit a stage of call and response. They're both called. The journey doesn't start unless you call and there's a call and you respond. They both had a stage of performing signs and wonders and miracles. Both had a stage of persecution and rejection, challenge, of opposition. Both had a stage in which they received a revelation of God. God was revealed to them. Both had a stage in which they were anointing others to a higher calling and a service. Both have a stage which involves victory. Victory over their enemies. And both have a stage in which they're joined by others in the Lord's service. For example, Elijah is followed by Elisha. Elisha is followed by the sons of the prophets. You have this clear journey. And so it's this life of Elijah and Elijah, these journeys of Elijah and Elisha that we can plot out, that we can show as stages. Well, so this is still very much a timeline. So I've got to change this into some kind of a circle or a cycle, and that's what I've done. So for those of you who've now got post-traumatic stress from having seen this the last time you saw this, it's still going to be here. It's going to be, this is the cycle. I want to put it in a cycle, the 7 different stages of the journey of Elisha and Elijah, the men of God. And I'd like to use this as the template for these classes this week. And let me just say from the outset that I fully, openly acknowledge that a pattern, which this pattern is no substitute for the message itself. It's no substitute. No substitute for opening it up and reading it and studying it for yourself. I want to use this as a pattern to help with the application of what I want to talk about, so that it may convey ultimately how simple God's design ultimately is. Perhaps it may be an oversimplification. It might be an oversimplified view of our spiritual journey, and it may make some assumptions, and I apologize if those offend you in any way. But I need something. I'm simple, and I need a simple map. I need something to help me comprehend my spiritual journey, my path, so that I can better understand what is important and what is not. For example, should we expect to hear the call of the gospel and respond to it and immediately have a victorious life? That's what some people think. But no, we know different. We know that that's not quite as easy as it sounds. Should we expect a journey filled with signs and wonders? Well, yeah, they're there, but don't expect to see them every day. Should you get bogged down? Should you feel depressed and bogged down by rejection and challenge and opposition? We should be ready for it. But it's helpful if we just see it as a stage of our journey, that there's something that lies beyond it, which is the Lord's deliverance. That God can deliver us and save us if we're bogged down in that part of my journey. This is the rest of my life. I'm going to be like this. I'm going to have to deal with this for the rest of my life. That's not helpful. You're not moving forwards. We have to get up off our faces and we need to move forward. So how do we do that? We do that by seeing that there's stages that proceed past. Similarly, we should all be involved in teaching others, raising others to service, teaching others about Christ, in anointing them, helping them in their life journey to serve. And we should all participate together in the victorious life as fellow laborers. So all of these are different stages that we see from Elijah and Elisha. And I want to propose that if there were stages of their journey, that it's appropriate for us to look at that as being stages of our journey. And I've shown this as a cycle, again, on purpose, because it places God in the center. Wherever we are on the journey, whichever stage we're at, it reminds us that we are never far from God. Several years ago, Brother Harold pulled up, either drew it or held up a bicycle wheel, and he said, I've been thinking that, God is in the center, and wherever you are, there's only one spoke between you and God, and that's where this came from, so you blame him. But this is where this came from, is the idea that wherever you are on your journey, you are not far from God. Because if you're in a timeline, you think that maybe you are drifting, maybe you're moving far away from God. If you see it as a spiral, you realize that wherever you are, you're only within a prayer's length of your Father. And I think that should be a comforting reminder to some of us. Second reason for this is because some of us think we're alone. The reason for this cycle, the reason for this pattern, we think that we're alone. No one can relate to us. No one can understand what I'm dealing with. No one can understand what I'm feeling. It's just not true. It's just not true. We don't do this alone. None of us do. We may encounter different stages differently, different experiences, and the journey that you have will be unique to mine, like a fingerprint. It will be unique, slightly different, but we will all experience similar stages to one another. You may have different fingerprints, but you all have fingers. So there's these stages that we all experience, and we can help one another as we experience them. And the third reason for showing it as a cycle is because the shape also implies that our journey is cyclical. Now, Brother Cam last night was talking about a cycle. This is the idea. It's something that's a continuum. It keeps going. It's like one of those, magnetic, whatever it is, that machine that I told you was rubbish with engineering or math or anything. But it keeps going. The idea is that it's cyclical. It doesn't end. It continues in a different way. And I'll get into this as we go through these classes. So the shape implies a cycle, a longer, ongoing continuum, that our life journey is part of a plan and a purpose that God has. Okay, so in the time I've got left, I want to start about the critical stage of becoming a child of God, because without it, the journey doesn't even start. We're going to start with the call and response. Each of us, for each of us, this is a stage that we all encounter. Our call will be unique. They'll come to us in a different way. But this is a stage we all have in common. We heard the call. We made a response. Sadly, too many people don't know what the call looks like or sounds like. They've been waiting for something big. They doubt or question whether they've been called at all. And perhaps it was too small. Maybe I didn't hear it. Or maybe I missed it. Or maybe I was called, but I wasn't really invited. Maybe I wasn't chosen, because there is this verse which is confusing in Matthew 20 when Jesus tells the disciples, many are called, but few are chosen. And I struggled with this verse for a long time until we do our thing where we open it up and we look at the Greek. But we realize that it's actually saying something different. What does this mean? If we look at the Greek, it translates to many are invited, but few elect. Many are invited, but few elect. That's the point. And it fits with the scriptural example of the sower as well. When we discover what the scriptural example of the sower, the lesson of the sower is, we see this seed thrown in abundance. Now, I'll tell you, it would give a headache to any farmer who's going there planting individual seeds, very judiciously, planting them specifically in rows, even specific measured holes, because they're mindful of the terrible waste. But here's the biblical picture. It's a sower throwing seed in abundance everywhere. That's why the parable of the sower talks about it falling on the path, falling in the stony ground, falling in the weeds. God is throwing out, the sower is throwing out, Christ is throwing out. We are to throw out the seed in abundance. The picture is spreading the seed everywhere. So the question is not if you're being called, you have been called. The question is, are you listening? Because not everyone who hears listens. And not everyone who listens responds and starts growing. And then not everyone who responds says yes. So the whole point is not actually about the call. I think the whole point is about getting us to listen, to answer, to respond, to say yes. And perhaps it's interesting that in the scriptures, the word answer appears 600 times. A third of them are in the Gospels. A third of them. 1/3. The Gospels are asking for an answer now. And you'll notice that 78 are in John. I think there's a specific application of John's Gospel that's saying twice as many are references about asking for an answer. The Gospel of John is about make an answer. How we respond, I think, is summarized nicely, and this is the last point I'm going to make before I wrap it up. How we respond is summarized nicely for us in the account of faith, in the account of the faith of Abraham, Hebrews 11. It's a good passage because it summarizes lots of other passages, and it also gives us some important added commentary. Hebrews 11, verse 8, by faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Abraham's response required faith, yes, but it also required something else, a key ingredient. A key ingredient was what? Obedience. Be obedient. That's the key. It required him to be obedient, to leave your country and your people and your possessions, to leave what you know, to journey to a land that I will show you, to go to the unknown, and when you get there, to dwell and wait. So Abraham obeyed, going, not knowing, and staying. Obedience is a very personal challenge. Certainly is for me. I will confess that looking back, I didn't realize that the behavior I lacked on my journey was obedience. I heard the call. I wanted to serve. But I think I've always thought that too much about my journey as mine. I've always thought that I've got too much of my journey is my say-so. That I have a lot of choice in where I go, what I do, and how I serve. It's only with time that I've realized that that's wrong. And here's why, because I never really liked. I say that in the past tense because it has actually changed. 25 years it took to get there. But I never really liked LA. I have a theory that God has taken all the British expats and he's scattered them along the West Coast. You're here, Popel's in San Francisco, I'm down, Joseph Palmer's down in San Diego, up and down. Because there's too much voltage in close proximity. The lights start flickering maybe. But I've never really liked LA. I've struggled. And everywhere else I've gone, I've come back and it's caused great stress for Jennifer and the kids. We've gone places I've gone, ooh, we could live there. Maybe we could move there. And again, it's caused some stress for Jennifer and the kids. And only now do I understand that. And it was one day I heard a simple comment from a Christian missionary. And he said this, go where you're sent, stay where you're put, do what you're asked. And it struck my conscience. And I learned. Because at the heart of that is obedience. It's what I was missing all along. And I look back and I see God's hand in my life, directing me and guiding me and blessing me. I can see that now with hindsight. And I think I've learned to go, to stay, to do. And I want to encourage you all to have that mindset of obedience, to go where you're sent, to stay where you're put, and to do what you're asked. So that's how we start the journey. Tomorrow we're going to look at the next stage, what it still continues to become a son or daughter of God. We're going to look at this next stage, which is the signs along our journey that literally light our path, give us direction, and keep our foot from slipping.